Yo, what's going on, everybody? Good morning. It is a great day to be a fight fan. We have got a lot of UFC fight cards coming up, and it starts with UFC Vegas 85, Roman Dolidze taking on Nassourdine Imavov. Thank you to everybody for your patience today. With the stream, got started a little late because my camera is not working as normal. If you guys are regulars here, you know my camera quality is normally a little bit higher, but ended up not working for me right before the stream. Didn't want to delay it any further. So without further ado, we're going forward with the webcam today and just got to roll with what we've got. So with that being said, if you guys are new here, welcome aboard. Appreciate you guys being here, trying it out with the morning stream today. Going to see how this works out and give it a try. If people like it, we'll stick with it. If not, we'll go back to the normal time slot in the evening. But in any case, we are going to break down the show like we always do. We're going to start on the first look with our main event breakdown and work our way down the card. If you guys haven't checked it out already, I did do a 45-minute or so in-depth breakdown on the main event for this card, where I just started giving some of my thoughts. I did watch a little tape. I broke that down on Twitter as well at Liam Picks Fights if you're interested in some of the specific footage. So I won't belabor the point on the main event, but what I want to stress for people that are new here is that this is my first look, okay? I'm going to do more tape study. I'm going to do more research over the course of the week. But what I like to do is I like to start the week by looking at the matchups on paper, talking about how we feel about them before we get influenced by the propaganda, by the fight week nonsense. And in addition, looking at the trends that we have to look at these fights and see what they can tell us about how we should approach our betting and about how we should think about these matchups moving forward. So without further ado, let's start with this main event, guys. And it's a fascinating fight. The more I look into this fight, the more competitive that I think it is on paper. I was surprised to see Nassourdine Imavov, as a pretty comfortable favorite here, given how his last main event in the Apex went was not a great showing from him against Sean Strickland. We've seen Sean Strickland ascend to that main event championship, right? He got the middleweight title, just lost a close fight to Dricus du Plessis in another title fight. So Sean has proven he's right at that level, in the top 5, top 10 in the division. And Nassourdine Imavov just wasn't there that night with the requisite skills, cardio, game plan to compete with a guy like Sean. But if we look at the rest of Nassourdine's body of work, he's done a good job implementing his wrestling and grappling supremacy over a lot of his opponents. That's interesting because he's known as the Russian sniper, but he's gone out there many times and used his wrestling and grappling to be successful and also to use those positions to leverage a lot of impactful ground and pound. We've seen Edmund Shabazian get finished via crucifix, right? It was, a somewhat competitive fight, but once he was able to establish that top position, get Edmund flat back on the ground, he was able to beat him up and land a lot of significant ground and pound, do damage quickly. In that fight, we saw another ground and pound stoppage against Ian Heinisch. We saw his best work against Joaquin Buckley in a decision come from the mount, come from the back mount with the wrist control, and also from Imavov, getting his own takedowns and then a back take to a rear naked choke attempt to end round 2. We've seen that Imavov is not a slouch in the grappling department, but I would also say that he does have some, favorable matchups, let's say, where he's shown off his grappling in the UFC. I mean, Edmund Shabazian, he's got a lot of physical strength. He's not horrible technically, but he just does not have the cardio, the capacity, the cardiovascular ability to compete for 15 minutes. And so when you see a guy, I predicted that Imavov was going to go out there and dominate that fight. And when you look, there's been a lot of times where Edmund has, broken under pressure. We saw the same thing happen against Derek Brunson. There's been a few other examples. So I think that Edmund, not a bad fighter, like I said, but maybe the physical tools did not match up with where he wanted to compete. And I think that you look at Joaquin Buckley fight, Buckley's tiny, like he's a guy that could definitely compete at 170 pounds, right? I don't mean to disparage him. He's got the barrel chest, right? It wouldn't be easy, but he just is not very tall for the division, right? He's very small compared to Imavov, and he was shooting shots from half a mile away. He didn't really set up most of his offense in that fight, and he really struggled to close the distance there. But what I would say is that Imavov does a pretty good job of controlling distance on the feet. Sean Strickland, he's one of those guys that disrespects the jab. He has his own potent jab. He's not afraid to get hit. So he walks forward, he throws through the jab. That really threw off Imavov, in my view. And I think that Dolidze is going to try and do the same thing. He's a pressure forward guy. He's going to want to try and get in his face. He's going to want to try and push that advantage. But Imavov does tend to operate behind the jab. He does tend to operate often with 2 and 3 jabs at a time. He does reposition himself in the cage relative to his opponent. So if the opponent tries to swarm him, he'll just stick a hand out in the air to keep them back and then reposition himself with lateral movement or backwards movement. He tries to set up uppercuts and the right hand. I think the sniper nickname comes from that ability to set up the rear hand quickly. He just throws it fast. And the jabs are what is normally setting the table for him. So we have definitely seen Imavov on the ground. Shout out to Gold Caps in the chat with a question for the day. Shout out to our guy, Fresh Gambles, as well, says, what's up, gentlemen? So to answer your question, Gold Caps, yeah, we've definitely seen Imavov on the ground a number of times. We haven't really seen him get taken down very much. It has happened in the Strickland fight, for example. But when you look, he's mostly been on top of his opponents. And I think that he has fairly good takedown defense. But I also think it could definitely get exploited in extended exchanges. It's a tricky fight from a physicality standpoint as well, because you got the much older guy in Roman Dolidze, but he's going to be able to match the physicality and the size of a guy like Imavov. And Imavov's pretty sizable guy for this division. And I think that part of the problem against Strickland was he didn't have that huge size advantage, and it was at 195-pound catch weight. Shout out to Moy, says out wrestled by Gregor Weeble. So yeah, I think that when it comes to Imavov, he's a guy that's done well, matchup dependent. But I don't know that we've seen that his wrestling and grappling can really translate against high-level opponents. You think about the Phil Hawes fight. That was really concerning because it's a visual where he's constantly getting pressed up against the fence. I was pretty confident in Imavov heading into that Phil Hawes fight. And I remember being so disappointed because he could have won that fight and he could have hurt Phil and he could have taken him out of the fight. But we just saw on so many occasions, we haven't seen Imavov stick it to people on the feet. When he gets the finish, it tends to be on the ground. It tends to be him working there. But I did not like what I saw from him in terms of the rear naked choke fundamentals when he was on Buckley's back. Something that I'm constantly looking to improve is my rear naked choke fundamentals. My chokes are not very good. It's something I'm cognizant of in terms of my rear naked strangle ability. I'm better at just grabbing a hold and squeezing than I am at properly applying the choke and properly securing the far wrist. But, when you're a UFC level fighter and when you're competing for, big opportunities in main events, I do think you got to be ready and prepared when it comes to those things. So I'm looking at a guy in Nassourdine Imavov whose wrestling and grappling has looked great against a certain level of competition, but I don't think it's proven against this level of wrestler and grappler like Roman Dolidze. So we've spent some time talking about our guy Imavov. Let's spend some time on the game of Dolidze. Dolidze is a guy that is coming off what I would call a controversial unanimous decision loss to Marvin Vettori. Is it a robbery? No, I wouldn't say that. It was a very close fight. I think rounds 1 and 3 were close, but they were rounds I'd give to Dolidze. And I think that when you look at those rounds and how he was able to approach it, he walked Marvin down. There wasn't much sophistication to it. He just came forward. He threw punches. He threw with power. He got in his face. And, I think Marvin didn't like that. I think there was a couple times he bothered Marvin with the power. And Marvin's a guy who's known historically for having a very good chin. So he was able to settle himself. If that's a 5-round fight, I'm not sure that Marvin Vettori wants to, keep going there. I think that I didn't love the visuals that I was seeing from Marvin in that fight. I kind of thought that he was getting, disheartened. And when I'm looking at a guy like Roman Dolidze, I say to myself, man, that Jack Hermanson fight, that stands out to me. He goes out there, and I like what he did in both, rounds of that fight. So if you look at the Jack Hermanson fight, it ends in round 2, and I thought that what we saw was a guy who understood, hey, I'm on the bottom position. I'm against a black belt. So I got to do some damage here. I can't just hang out and play jujitsu. So if you guys remember that fight, he goes out there, he throws a bunch of elbows to the head. And all these clips I did put out on Twitter as well at Liam Picks Fights. If you're looking for, the clips that I'm talking about, he throws elbows to the head. And then as soon as Jack goes to defend, he then swivels his hips, goes for the armbar. And I don't even believe, guys, that he was looking for an armbar. He almost never is, right? He just uses the armbar as a setup to get you to pull away, right? Some grapplers, in order to get their game off, need to be really close to you, but other guys need space. And I think that Roman Dolidze needs a little bit of space, in order to create the inversions, in order to create these weird, unique setup opportunities. But he's a real handful. What he did in that fight with Jack is the first time he went underneath, he used the elbows, he used the hip swivel, he went for the armbar, and when he didn't get it, he hip bumped nearly to the mount. But because Jack was fresh, because he's a strong guy, and because he's a black belt, he was able to get his hips back underneath him. So he just stood back up to the feet, cleared out of the position. So he goes from being underneath in the guard to getting back up to the feet, using really effective grappling transitions and damaging shots from the bottom. Then you see in round 2, same exchange. This guy does not care about defending takedowns. You see a very heavy sprawl every time there's a takedown attempt against Nassourdine and Imavov, right? He wants to control the attempt. He wants to be on top. And I think that he's a guy that relies on being on top to be an effective grappler. Nothing wrong with that. If you could always get on top, that's the way to go, right? Or if you could prevent your opponent from creating grappling scenarios, that's fine too. But the one danger is, if you're not prepared for somebody to be underneath you, a lot of times, like I mentioned, Imavov's having success in these fights by getting takedowns. If it's going sideways on the feet, he's bailing himself out with a takedown. But is that wise against Roman Dolidze? I think that's the question of this matchup. Because if you're Nassourdine Imavov and you're trying to coach him up, I would be giving him the game plan of, hey man, stick him with the jab and then move away, throw a leg kick and then move away, stick him with the jab and then move away. That's what I would do to try and beat a guy like Roman Dolidze, because frankly, he's a real handful. He's a really dangerous guy. I would try and chip away at him over time. I try and break him down piece by piece and just use your superior speed to try and beat him up. I think that that is a wise path to victory. But what I've seen from Imavov is that a lot of times, he likes to have a little bravado. He likes to throw a lot. He likes to get into some of these exchanges. And I don't think his cardio is something to write home about either, frankly. So when I'm looking at it, I say to myself, man, this guy Dolidze, what have I seen from him? I've seen incredible grappling transitions that are almost unreplicated in the UFC. Like that calf slicer situation was fantastic, but the way he was able to turn it belly down, I mean, guys, I can't imagine a worse situation in fighting than that situation that Jack Hermanson is in, right? You're in a submission where it's a painful calf slicer submission, but moreover, you can't move. You're physically restrained. You can't get out. If you try and get out, it exerts more pressure on your calf. And then you've got a guy who's 185 pounds, probably 200 plus pounds on the night, holding your wrists and punching you in the head while your calf is trapped. I mean, it's an absolute disaster. It's like a nightmare scenario in fighting. So just beastly finish from Roman Dolidze there. And if that was the only one he had in the UFC that involved creative grappling, maybe I just write it off as a one-off. Maybe Jack Hermanson just flaked that fight. But I mean, guys, Jack Hermanson has submitted multiple black belts in the UFC. He's looked very good in the grappling sequences against most guys in the UFC. But Roman Dolidze was physically overwhelming. He was too good in the bottom position, and he just had too much depth to his game. Jack is good at a bunch of skills, but he wasn't able to get to his skills. He was too busy defending. He was too busy reacting. And Roman Dolidze, whether it's on the feet or on the ground, he's got very dangerous offense. So I think that's a fascinating part of this matchup. We'll talk about some of these other fights from Roman Dolidze real quick. The Phil Haas fight. I mean, guys, that Phil Haas fight, again, he gets taken down, and I have the question, like, who does it benefit when Roman Dolidze gets taken down? in his recent fights, it has not benefited his opponents to get top position, right? It's been a massive liability. He goes and creates that armbar transition with such rapidity and fluidity that it really puts his opponents in danger, and it puts him in a in a reactive sequence, right? And then what we saw from him is that heel hook entry. Honestly, you got to take the hat off to him in that one and say, hey, this guy's a freaking gentleman, because he absolutely tore the knee of Phil Hawes, and he gave him a chance to surrender, man. A lot of guys might have kept ripping on that, say, hey, when the referee pulls me off, whatever. He knew what he had done. He knew the knee was screwed, and he lets him go. He stands back up, no knee underneath him. I mean, guys, when we talk about why leg locks are ineffective in the UFC, I mean, most guys don't know how to do them. That's a big part of it, right? Like, I could tell you, leg locks will change your life, right? If you're going with the wrong guy, if you don't know what you're doing, if you roll the wrong way, leg locks will change your life fast. So I do think that Roman Dolidze, incredibly dangerous leg locker, very dangerous, with his choking series as well. He can break limbs. He can put you in really compromised joint locks. He's just a very, very savvy guy. And I do think he's got more depth to his grappling, more sophistication to his grappling than a guy like Imavov, frankly. Imavov can probably match him a little bit with that physicality. So that's what makes it interesting, right? We've seen other guys like a Trevin Giles, who's not a guy who's known for being the world's best grappler or something like that, go out there and shut down a lot of Dolidze's grappling. But I do think Dolidze's been a lot more dialed in the recent performances that we've seen. We definitely saw a lot more showmanship and a lot more flustering about and being silly in his old matches. And I just think that he realized, hey, I have a short window in the UFC. I'm 35 years of age. It's time for me to move right now. And we've seen him go out there with a cold look on his face and just send guys to the hospital over and over. Broke Kyle Dawkins' face. I mean, dropped him bad. I'm getting the haircut today, Dixon. I got that Diego Lopez cut right now, but I'm getting that haircut today, brother. I'm on the case. I appreciate the shout, though. And shout out to everybody who's rocking with us live, guys. We got 40 people here rocking with us in the early morning, 9 a.m. here on the East Coast. So I want to say cheers to everybody who's sipping a coffee, wherever you are around the world right now. Cheers. Peace, love, and chicken grease to every one of you guys. A sip of coffee, and we're right back to it. Now, we'll close out with just talking about the fact that this guy broke Kyle Dawkins' face. I mean, it was absolutely harrowing stuff. What I think Roman Dolidze has to offer, if I had to briefly summarize his game and Imavov's game, here's the concrete details of these two guys. I think they both have similar flaws. When you look at how they struggle, they both are very easy marks to the low kick, right? If either one of these guys was to commit to a low kicking strategy, I think it's much more likely to be Imavov. I think he's more mobile. I think he's a little bit more adaptable in that way. I think he's a little bit more frequent of a kicker in general. So that for me is a potential game changer on the feet, is the kicking sequencing. Roman Dolidze's kicks are something that are very unpredictable. What do I mean by that? I mean that they're hard for his opponents to predict, but they're even harder for analysts like me to predict because I look at the tape, and some fights he goes out there, he throws plenty of kicks. That fight against Marvin Vettori, I think he could have really benefited from throwing kicks in that fight. He didn't throw kicks. He went out there just primarily to box. So when I'm looking at Dolidze's tape, the frustration I would say I have is I didn't see enough offensive wrestling against Vettori. I would have liked to see more, and I didn't see enough volume. I would have liked to see just a touch more. He was stalking with the striking. He's coming forward with the hands, but I think that if he can tick up that volume a little bit, if he could be a little more assertive with the offensive wrestling, I think that would be important. But I do think this is a guy, he's not like a Charles Oliveira where, goes to the ground and the other guy has to be scared every time. But I am saying, like, I don't know how many people, excuse me, would feel really comfortable getting on top of a guy like Roman Dolidze, because he could do a lot of damage quick. Watch the sequencing that he does with those elbows, guys. He's a big guy. He generates a lot of leverage, and he throws with, no compunction for his opponent. So I think Yeah, shout out to Noah in the chat here. Hit the nail on the head. Dolidze, multiple subs into KOs in the UFC. Never seen something like it. Absolutely. Mason says on his way to Wawa to get the coffee. Hey, cheers to that. Hope that you guys are all feeling good this morning. It's a beautiful day to be here. And I think that this is a great fight. So the bottom line is you've got the one guy in Roman Dolidze who's a sensational grappler, who's a sensational power hitter, at this point, but he's a little bit old for the division. That's his concern here. It's not the youngest division overall here at middleweight, but I do think that Roman Dolidze, kind of getting towards the tail end of that prime. So what he has to do is he has to make his move right now if he's going to. And Nassourdine Imavov's the kind of guy that I think he could beat. I think he's going to have to fight smart. We've seen Imavov, though, he is not a guy who's impervious, right? Like I said, the loss to Phil Hawes has aged like absolute milk. And then the Sean Strickland loss, it's not terrible, but the way it looked, he did not look like he was prepared to compete, over 5 rounds. And now he's back in a 5-round setting. And Roman Dolidze, he lives and trains in Las Vegas for these fight camps. Whereas Nassourdine Imavov, he's at the MMA Factory in Paris. And frankly, some of the grappling choices that we've seen from MMA Factory fighters over the years, I have not been altogether impressed with. So I think that Imavov, this is a prove-it spot for him. He's a chalk favorite here. I understand it. He's the younger guy. He's a little bit bigger on social media. He's coming in with a little bit of that hype and that acclaim. He trains with the right guys. He's around the right people. But I just don't know that I see it as an easy fight for him, as a fight where I'm saying I'm confident that 60% of the time he's going to go out there and win, because I just think Dolidze is a really hard guy to get one over on right now in this middleweight division. I think he's a dangerous fight for almost everybody. And I think you have to be really smart and disciplined to fight him. And I think if you get emotional, you could lose. I think if you make one mistake on the ground, you could lose. And I think that if you want to trade shots with this guy on the feet, it's not an easy proposition either. Interesting nugget from our guy Moise. Imavov has left MMA Factory. So let's pull up our guy Nassourdine Imavov on Instagram. Where is he training at, Moise? If you have that information handy, I'd be very curious to know, my man. But even still, I would be curious if he's been working on that wrestling and grappling or just continuing to work on that boxing heavy approach. But that is an interesting note, man. I think that's probably good for his career. Probably got as much as he was going to get from there. But yeah, Fernand Lopez was commented on his stuff back in June of 2023. So it seems like a more recent development. Very interesting. Dixon says, I feel like it's the numbers steering people Roman's way. I mean, I don't know, man. Because if you just said to me no number on this fight, like who do you think's going to win? I would say it's a really close fight, but I would probably make it like minus 115 Roman Dolidze. If you didn't tell me the tale of the tape, right? If I didn't know how old these guys were and I had just watched them fight, that's what I would say. I'd say I'd probably make Roman Dolidze a slight favorite here. So that's what makes it a compelling fight, right? Is that the hardware, some of the cardio, some of the 5-round elements, we don't know exactly how that's going to play. But what I do know is I can look at some past data points and try and, infer how that could relate to this fight. And, one past data point is 5-round fight in Las Vegas. Nassourdine Imavov put on a career worst performance, arguably, against Sean Strickland. I think that's fair to say. So, yeah, that's interesting. Oh, and Moise says he's training at a new gym, but I don't understand French. Interview is on YouTube. Fair play, my man. I don't understand French either, so we'll leave that to the professionals. But overall, you guys have gotten my, basically matchup take on this fight. Now let's turn it over to the betting odds real quick, where we're currently looking at the fightodds.io odds screen, and I'm seeing a plus 141 on Bet Online, one of the sharper sports books out there for the Roman Dolidze side. I'm seeing a minus 161 on a Nassourdine Imavov side. So it looks like the best available price in the market is around those numbers as well. Seems like the market's pretty tight. Not a lot of variety here either. Most books between plus 135. FanDuel, I'd say, is a little bit of an outlier with a plus 124, but they've got the minus 160, so they're just booking in much higher VIG on their line. But in any case, I look at this fight and I say to myself, could make a case for either guy if the line was a little bit closer. But I think that Imavov has a little bit more to prove to me for this this chalk price tag personally. Now let's turn it over to the trends on this fight, and we'll close out the main event talk with the trends on this one. And when I'm looking at it, Nassourdine Imavov has actually been an underdog in several of his UFC fights, but as a favorite, he has produced 2-1 in the organization for a 9.7% ROI. So he's turned you a profit if you've been betting on him as a favorite. The examples of him cashing as a favorite in the UFC, minus 115 against Edmund Shabazian, went out there and got the TKO 2, and then went out there against Joaquin Buckley and got the decision win as a minus 238 favorite in France, in Paris, if you guys remember that one as well. So when I'm looking at the betting trends on the Imavov side, it is curious to me that he's went from being an underdog against Jordan Williams, Ian Heinisch, to now he's being favored against Roman Dolidze. Do find that to be a bit interesting. Certainly. And when you look at the Roman Dolidze side, let's talk about how he's performed as a betting underdog. 3-1 as a betting underdog so far in his UFC career. Pretty impressive stuff from the Dolidze side. He has a 124.5% ROI as a dog so far in the UFC. You could say that he's due for some regression potentially. He's been doing such a great job. But if you look, you could argue, guys, that he should have a much higher ROI, that he should be, in fact, 4-0 as an underdog. If you thought that he won that Vettori fight, believe the closing line odds, according to BetMMA.tips, were plus 460. I do remember it being like plus 230, plus 250, plus 300, and I thought the line was insane. And when it came down to it, I thought that the way that the fight played out, that line was insane. So he was plus 240 against Kyle Dawkins, won via KO1. He was plus 163 against Phil Hawes, won via KO1. He was plus 195 against Shakur Manson. He won via KO2. I mean, this guy's been producing. Not only has he been a dog, but he's been a dog that's going out there and winning by finish violently early. So that's something that's hard to ignore for me as well from a trend standpoint. The guy who's been a little bit more productive is actually the betting underdog here, Roman Dolidze. So I would be thinking this is probably a dog or pass situation, but I will do a little bit more tape, a little more research, and a little more due diligence. Come back to you guys for bets and banter. Talk it out with our guy, Rich, on Thursday's program. That being said, guys, let's dig on in to this co-main event of the evening where we've got Renato, Moicano, money, Moicano wants money. And he's taking on Drew Dober, the Crimson Chin. This is a fascinating matchup of two guys that are both, what's a polite way to say it, right? Fun action fighters in the lightweight division that maybe aren't due for contention, at this stage of their career. You look at the Drew Dober side, and he has been pretty productive lately in his bouts. He lost to Matt Vravola, got the chin cracked in that one. But he had been on a 4-1 run in his last 5 fights. But I think you start peeling back the layers of those particular matchups, and you can poke some holes there. Ricky Glenn, not a very durable fighter at this point in his career, been struggling particularly with the durability. You look at the Matt Vravola fight, and Drew got caught early on in that fight. But honestly, I thought Matt had his number. I thought Matt was the better wrestler. I thought he was the better grappler. He knocked him the hell out on the feet. So I think he's probably the better striker too. I think Matt just had his number that night. I think he was always going to win that fight. 8 times out of 10, 7 times out of 10, something like that. But in any case, you look at the Bobby Green fight. Bobby is he's an older guy in the division, right? He just got brutally knocked out by Jalen Turner as well. He's a tough guy, but that chin is starting to go. He's a little bit older. He's had a million fights. So I think that that's something to consider. The Rafael Alves fight. I mean, Alves went out there and put on a war, put on an action fight. Again, another fun action fighter, but a guy that didn't really have the skills to pay the bills, did not stick around with the UFC. I think he had, double-digit losses potentially as a professional. So he's a, solid fighter, but also a guy that could definitely find a way to lose fights. Doesn't necessarily have the cardio to push for the full 15 minutes there. So you look at the Terrence McKinney fight, and I mean, Terrence McKinney, guys, almost put Drew Dober on a highlight reel. And that's something else that we got to remember. And obviously, the Crimson Chin was able to rally there, but Matt Frevola probably slid Terrence 5 on that. Like, hey, man, I know you caught me that one time, but you did that number on Drew Dober and softened that one up for me. So when you look at the prior fights, right, Brad Riddell, they had a very close back and forth war. But I think Brad Riddell was able to separate himself with a couple takedowns, if my memory serves. Islam Makhachev was able to take him down, dominate from the top position. Beneil Dariush, back in the day, was able to take him down and submit him as well. So we've definitely seen Drew Dober struggle at times on the ground. But what's interesting about this fight is it's a very good style clash, because Drew Dober has struggled immensely on the ground throughout the course of his career. 9-4 career to the submission, 11-2 career to the KO prop. And when I'm looking back, the KO must have been very early in his career, like way back in the day, because I'm not seeing it on his professional record. So it's probably like his first 1 or 2 fights. And then when you look at the more recent one against Frevola, he got caught on the chin. It was a pretty stiff shot. But Renato Moicano, he's not really a power hitter, right? Like 0 career wins by knockout. So he's not really a guy who's going to go out there and threaten the chin of a guy like Drew Dober. When Renato Moicano has been really effective on the feet in the UFC, I think of instances like him going out there and chopping the legs off of his opponents. We saw that against Calvin Kattar back when he was in the featherweight division. Now he's at 155 pounds, where he's had mixed results. He has not been knocked out since 2020 when he fought Rafael Fiziev, but we have seen, he's been hurt, rocked, wobbled in a couple of these other fights. He has won 3 fights in a row via rear naked choke in terms of the fights that he has won. However, he is 1-3 he's 3-1 in his last 4 fights with a loss to Rafael dos Anjos in the mix. And I did take RDA pretty big against Moicano. Moicano was flown in on short notice for that one. I think they had him moving around weight classes, like guy who used to fight at 45. That one I think was at 170. Let me just confirm that, so I don't want to speak out of turn. No, it was 160-pound catch weight, excuse me. So, yeah, 160-pound catch weight. So the guy still had to cut weight, and he got bodied in that fight. He got beat up really badly there. So it showed some heart for him to stick around for the full 5 rounds. But to be frank, at the time, I thought that RDA was kind of being merciful. I thought that RDA kind of let the foot off the gas at a certain point because the referee didn't intervene. But, I mean, it was an absolute savage beatdown. Shout out to Matt Campbell. Says, never seen anyone do live shows this early. Love it. Rise and grind, baby. Hey, we do not go to sleep when we're tired on this show. We go to sleep when the job is done, my friend. So I'm excited to continue talking about these fights, and I appreciate the kind words and the support. And when you look at this, a couple of interesting dynamics to the fight. The wins for Renato Moicano, that's where I think you start to run into some trouble. Brad Riddell, very small fighter for the division, guy who's been on a rough run. He's been on hard times lately. So, no harm, no foul, but I don't really give it that much credence. When you look at the Alexander Hernandez fight, he's a very hot and cold fighter. He's got some half decent skills, but you look at Alexander Hernandez, he's 14-7 overall as a professional. Granted, his only ever submission loss was against Renato Moicano. I do think that's pretty impressive, but he does have 3 losses via KO or TKO, 3 losses via decision. So it's not like Alexander Hernandez is an unbeatable fighter either. And then the Jai Herbert fight, went out there and submitted a guy who's primarily, going to go out there, look to strike, 9 wins by KO, 1-1 career to the sub. So he trains at a BJJ gym, but we all know Jai Herbert going to go look for the knockout more often than not, going to go swing and bang on the feet. Moicano getting dusted by Fiziev kind of just makes sense. Fiziev's a big hitter. Moicano, had the grappling edge there, but Fiziv's not easy to out grapple either. So it just seemed like that was a tough fight on paper for him. Damir Hadzovic, that's not a win that ages great either. I don't really believe in Damir as a high level fighter. Chan Sung Jung, fair loss. But Jose Aldo, another fair loss. It's just the fact that he's losing so many fights by KO and TKO. He's been hurt, rocked, wobbled a million times in the fights. So he finds ways to win. He's a pretty decent fighter. But I do think that some people pointing out, like my guy Dixon in the chat, Moicano about to go full-time YouTube after this L. Dolidze and Dricus destined to be many more skilled fighters than themselves. I feel that, Danny. So when I'm looking at it, I say to myself, man, you've got a guy in Renato Moicano who could definitely go out there and submit Drew Dober. But if he's not going to go out there and submit Drew Dober, then I think Drew is probably going to win the fight. Because when you look at Drew, what he does well is he hits people really hard. And so like if your problem is that you don't have a great chin, you don't want to fight a guy like Drew Dober. Because if you look, guys, one fight that I got wrong, and I always encourage you to try and to learn. Like if you get something wrong, if you make a mistake, go out there and try and learn from it. And when I look at my past cap of Drew Dober, I've underrated how dangerous a knockout threat that this guy is. Because I've always said, like, man, but I think this is going to be the dynamic. I think this is how it's going to go. If you look, I saw, Drew Dober getting absolutely pieced up by Bobby Green. Excuse me. Hopefully that's enough sneezes for one show. But I saw him getting absolutely pieced up by Bobby Green, and I thought Bobby Green was going to win that fight. But I'll tell you something, guys. Do you remember what happened in that fight? Bobby Green was winning, and he was winning, and he was winning, and then he got killed. He just got absolutely hit with a massive blow and just went down like he had gotten shot by a sniper. And so when I think about that, I say to myself, man, this guy, Drew Dober, probably been making some gradual wrestling and grappling improvements over the course of his career. Losing to Islam Makhachev will give you a pass there. Losing to Brad Riddell, I mean, it was a super close fight on the feet, and Brad Riddell is out there trying to take him down because of it. And Moicano, he doesn't really have a body type that's great for going out there and pursuing takedowns, frankly. Like, can he go out there and get them? Yeah, I'm sure he could get some, but, I don't think he's super effective with his takedown game. A lot of what he does is he likes to go for overhooks. He likes to try and grab the body lock and stuff. He's a big, tall, long guy. It just doesn't really facilitate those leg attacks, especially on a guy who's a fire hydrant like Drew Dober. So if you look at the tail of the tape for this fight, both guys surprisingly old, right? Like, let's say the median age of this fight is like 35, right? Just over 35 for Drew Dober and just under 35 for Renato Moicano. And when I'm looking at it on paper, I say to myself, man, Moicano could have a very easy path to this win by just taking the back, going for the sub. But Drew Dober is a guy that relentlessly positive, coming off a win, got some of that momentum back with a big win by knockout. And I think that, Drew is a guy that the UFC relies on to go out there and put on these fun fights. They're giving him they're giving him a spot where Drew is going out there and he can go, blow for blow with most guys in this lightweight division, especially guys like Moicano who are primarily going to go for the low kicks. Man, it's a fascinating one. Let's look at the betting odds. Let's look at the trends, and let's see if that can elucidate some more clear spots for us on this fight, because I do find this one a little bit tricky. It's a clear striker versus grappler type dynamic. Although I will say, I think that Dixon might be onto something here. He says Moicano's been talking crap about the UFC on his channel. I noticed that as well. Talking crap about UFC 300 as well. UFC setting up Moicano for failure in this spot. That's possible. Dober was given a 42-year-old Ricky Glenn to build him up to fail. Very possible. UFC loves Dober. He's a cash cow whenever he fights. Fair play. Big Liam, my man, North Ender. Cheers. Welcome back. Doesn't get more favorable for Moicano, in my opinion. Interesting. I wouldn't be so sure. I wouldn't be so sure here. Like I get the case for Moicano, but he's not that young. He's not that durable. He's not that marketable. And he is kind of talking shit about the UFC. And he does look like he's exploring some other avenues. I don't think Drew Dober is going to be doing fucking YouTube tomorrow. Like, I don't think he's going to be doing announcing or some shit. Like, Drew Dober, I don't know that he knows anything else but get up, wrap gloves, and fight. That's what he does. So I do think that there's a case to be made for Drew Dober here, but I respect my man Mason, and he's good with them numbers. So the stats definitely back it. But yeah, that's an interesting point as well, Mark. I noticed that too. I noticed Moicano said he hates the Apex. I wanted to bet him, but I don't like that for him. Coming off the 1-year layoff and the ACL injury, there's a lot of unknowns here. Absolutely. I think that is a great point. So if we look at Renato Moicano as a favorite, here's where the numbers don't line up. So I know the numbers for the fight analytics do line up here for Moicano, according to my boy Mason, who is a very sharp guy. But I do want to just say, here's where the numbers maybe don't add up. 5-3 as a UFC favorite at an average odds of -190. It's going to book you a minus 6.12% ROI. You've been losing money if you've been betting on Moicano as a favorite in his UFC run. Granted, let's look at his more recent UFC sample size. -125 against Brad Riddell. Gets the sub in round 1. -149 against Alexander Hernandez. Gets the sub in round 2. -223 against Shai Herbert. Gets the sub in round 2. -417 against Demir Hadzovic. Gets the sub in round 1. But if you look at the fights prior to that, he was favored to beat Chan Sung Jung, the Korean zombie. He got knocked out in the first round. He was favored to beat Jose Aldo. He got knocked out in the second round. He was favored to beat Brian Ortega. He got submitted in the third round. And granted, he was whooping Brian Ortega's ass. People will forget that. But when you look back, Renato Moicano, he's a guy that has definitely let, he's snatched defeat from the jaws of victory before, right? Like, he's not a guy that goes out there and puts on a perfect game plan. Shout out to Chuckles Play says, I see Moicano reaching out to grapple and getting starched, similar to the Khizriev KO. Dixon says, I love Renato, but I'm scared for him. Mason says, not going to lie, did not know about the ACL. Dixon says, love when Liam, when this fight ends exactly like Bobby Green versus Grant Dawson, please think of me. Shout out to you then. I hope you're ending the ends in 60 seconds if that's the case. Honestly, the ends in 60 seconds could play for both guys here, I don't think Drew Dober is going to tap in 60 seconds, but could he go to sleep? I mean, stranger things have happened. You can't tough guy a choke. Yeah, we'll have to see. I'll watch the tape on Renato Moicano's takedown defense in more depth. And then I will get back to you guys on that. But let's look at the trend on Drew Dober here as well. So Drew Dober, as an underdog, guys, he's only been an underdog 9 times in his UFC run. He's had, over 20 fights with the promotion. So a lot of times he's been going out there favored to get the job done. But 3-6, just 3-6 as a UFC underdog. However, Drew Dober has produced a 20.8% ROI. So is he winning every time that he is a underdog? No, he is certainly not. He is losing well more often than he's winning. But because he has come through as a big underdog before, then he has paid off his underdog backers over time. How has he done it? Jamie Varner, plus 335, gets the sub round 1 back in December of 2014. So long time ago there. Got the win over Scott Holtzman back in 2016 via unanimous decision as a plus 167 underdog. And his other underdog win in the UFC was against Nasrat Haqparast. I thought that was such a great spot. January of 2020 against Nasrat Haqparast, gets the KO 1 plus 285. Wow. Unbelievable. And when you look since then, he's been favored, guys, in every fight except the Islam fight. So the Islam fight is the lone exception. He was favored to beat Alexander Hernandez and did. He was favored to beat Brad Riddell and lost a close, controversial split decision. He was favored to beat Terrence McKinney, KO 1. Favored to beat Rafael Alves, KO 3. Favored to beat Bobby Green, KO 2. Favored to beat Matt Frivola, lost via KO 1. And favored to beat Ricky Glenn, won via KO 1. This guy has been favored a lot of his recent fights. Now he's back to being the dog. Interesting stuff. Very fascinating fight. I will tape study the takedowns of Renato Moicano because I think that is the defining question of this matchup. If you guys go to my profile on X, on Twitter, whatever the hell you want to call it, then you will see I put up the relevant questions for the main event. I think there's one super relevant question for this co-main event, which is Renato Moicano going to dictate this fight with takedowns or low kicks? Because if he's not, I think he's going to get touched on the chin, and I don't like that prospect for him. Shout out to Bailey, says, is this live? This is live. Cheers to you, Bailey. Welcome aboard. We are still rocking and rolling on this main card and excited to kick it to the next fight where we will talk about a fascinating matchup. And it's a rebooked matchup. So I will try not to belabor the point on this one. We've got Randy Brown taking on Muslim Salikhov. And this is a fight that I do not have the strongest read on. If you guys are familiar with my long-term betting process, if you've been watching the show for a while, then you may know that I do not like betting on rebooked fights. It's something I try to avoid as a rule. Reason being, the bookmakers already seen where the sharp action's coming in. They've already had an opportunity, to shape the line. And I do think that it becomes harder psychologically, to know what's real and what's fake, what's signal and what's noise in that kind of market. So I normally keep my hands clean of these kind of matchups, but let's talk about it. We've got clearly a huge anthropomorphic advantage on the Randy Brown side. That hasn't been the case in some of these other matchups, but definitely the case here where Randy's going to be 33 years of age compared to 39 years of age for Muslim Salikhov. And he's also going to be the much bigger fighter here in every capacity. He's going to be the taller fighter. He's going to be the longer fighter. So he's really checking every box when it comes to his intangibles and his physical characteristics. Now, as for the Muslim Salikhov side, he is a guy that has quietly produced for his moneyline backers in the UFC. I tweeted that out earlier, and I think, or I retweeted it. It's something I had tweeted long ago. And when you look, Muslim Salikhov's a guy that is 1-0 as a UFC underdog, right? Very rarely been a dog in his fights. That being said, he's had a very weird and at times quite soft strength of competition in the organization. So let's poke holes in Muslim Salikhov's resume, despite him having the greatest nickname, the King of Kung Fu. He fought Alex Garcia, lost via submission in round 2. Most people are probably asking right now, who is Alex Garcia? He beat Ricky Rainey via KO. He beat Nordine Taleb via KO. That was a solid win. And that was his only time being an underdog in the UFC. He got the win there via KO1 as a dog. But then you see that in his very next fight, he goes out there, wins a decision against Laureano Staropoli, not a very impressive fighter, wins a split decision against Easy Dos Santos. That's his best win by far. I thought that was, very close fight to say the least. I thought it could have went either way. But in any case, I don't think it was a robbery. You look at the Trinaldo fight, I mean, an ancient fighter, another guy who's like older than Muslim Salikhov. So fighting some age contemporaries, some older guys. Then he fights the Leech. And what happens? I max bet the Leech. I had 10 units on the Leech plus 150 there. I was like, you're going to give me the guy who's bigger, younger, longer, hits harder, meaner, will poke you in the eyes, will do anything to win. Like, yeah, give me that guy at plus 150 for a big amount every time. So I did like that spot for sure. And then when I looked at the fight with Fialho, I mean, man, Fialho's just not very good, right? He's a guy who I think has been cut from the organization, didn't really have the chin to hack it at this level. And the Dalby fight, I could definitely forgive losing that fight for Muslim. I think that's a fight where, Muslim can hold his head high knowing, hey, Dalby's a tough guy to beat, right? He just went out there and finished Bonfim. Dalby hasn't been an easy mark for almost anybody in the UFC. Went out there and upset the apple cart when Daniel Rodriguez was like a minus 300 favorite against him as well. So he's the king of springing those upsets. No shame there. But when you look at this fight, right, he's now back to being an underdog. That's unfamiliar territory for him, but it comes with his age. It comes with the fact that the last fight was canceled, I'm sure. And you look at Randy Brown, you could also poke some holes in his resume. I said Francisco Trinaldo is ancient. Well, he's way older than Randy than he was compared to Muslim Salikhov, but that's Randy's second most recent win in the UFC, right? His most recent win is over Wellington Turman, a perpetually chinny individual that Randy was not able to finish, which I think is mildly concerning. You look at the Jack Della fight and the submission, you know, basically he had gotten badly hurt. He was compromised. He was rocked. So I think that that's something to bear in mind here. Is that, Randy, he can be hurt. He can be rocked. He can be wobbled. And that's something you do have to keep in mind when somebody's going to be, minus 250 favorite or minus 300 favorite, right? Is it Muslim Salikhov just sucks all of a sudden? I mean, listen, Muslim's never been the best fighter in the world, but what he's pretty good at is picking his shots and then finding big one-shot kills that hurt people or steal rounds. And that's kind of what Randy's been susceptible to throughout his career. He's done a good job of managing distance at times. At other times, he's really struggled. Guys that have mixed in the low kick have really had a great time getting to Randy. But you look at some of these other fights, split decision win over Chaos Williams. It's a fine win. He was a slight underdog in that fight. He was a big favorite against Jared Gooden, and he won a close decision there. It did not look super impressive. And when you look at the Alex Cowboy Oliveira fight, another guy who's no longer with the promotion, he lost to Vicente Luque via knockout. Again, it was a brutal starching. The Nico Price fight, that was the one that made his chin look really suspect, in my opinion. And then even the fight against Michael Graves way back in the day, he's been submitted before. So he's not impervious on the ground. I think that Muslim Salikhov is probably aging out of his UFC run. I think he could definitely get finished in this fight. Last time out, what I had noted was that these are two guys that just strike me as like a fight not to go the distance type of guys because of how they fight. But when you look, I feel worse about that prop now than in the first iteration of the fight. Randy does have the ability to win this fight, in my view, by submission. I think Muslim Salikhov, a little bit suspect career to the submission. You look, he was submitted via rear naked choke back in 2012 by Chris Holcomb. He was also submitted via rear naked choke by Alex Garcia back in 2017. And at his current age and his level of physical fitness, the way he tires out at the end of fights, I could definitely see, Randy just outlasting him and submitting him. Randy has huge limb length advantage, and that creates a lot of submission dynamics as well. We've seen Randy get that one-arm rear naked choke, for example. So I think that Randy should get the job done here, but it's just super hard for me to trust a guy like that at a huge, significant chalk price. Granted, you look at Randy Brown as a favorite. He's 7-2 for a 19.1% ROI. So he's producing in that role as a favorite. But like I said, Muslim Salikhov 1-0 as an underdog for a 115% ROI in his own right. So I think that that's something fair to note. But that's not a fight that I care too much about to discuss. So we can move along to the next fight on the card, which is Viviane Araujo taking on Natalia Silva. This is a fun fight, guys. Between two Brazilian women, we got Brazil on Brazil crime. However, we have a 10-year age gap here, and that will be favoring Natalia Silva. And this does actually fit a system play that I talk about, guys. And, unfortunately, it's not an underdog odds, so it's not a system bet. But it's just something I always talk about from a prediction standpoint, which is a younger fighter with more professional experience. And that's what you have with Natalia Silva, right? She's had over 20 professional fights compared to just 17 for her 37-year-old counterpart here. There's going to be a reach advantage on the Viviane Araujo side, but I think that's going to be offset by the speed advantage that we will see from Natalia Silva. So I think that it's a fascinating fight. For me, Natalia Silva was something of a revelation when she came to the UFC. I thought she was going to give Jasmine Jasudavicius problems, but I wasn't sure that she was going to make the weight. I wasn't sure that she had been training super serious. We hadn't seen much from Natalia Silva since the regional scene. And then she had a gap in her career. If you look 2019 to 2022, she had not had a professional fight. But now she's fought Andrea Lee, seasoned girl, been around the MMA space for a long time. Victoria Leonardo, seasoned girl, been around the space for a long time. Teresa Bleda, strong, physical, young contemporary, and she knocked her out. That was crazy. The UFC wanted to promote the shit out of that, I'll tell you. And then the Jasmine Jasuda Vicious fight. I mean, what have we seen from Jasmine ever since? She's been relentless. She's been aggressive. She's been very good at taking people down and, grabbing a hold of, these moments. Moyes just distracted me completely with the never forget Blada choked out Silva round one. I'll have to look into that. I do not remember that at all, Moyes. So I'll definitely rewatch that tape. I haven't watched any tape on this fight. I will just let you guys know. I have to watch tape on this. Blada definitely is a gas bag as well. I agree with you there. But she's just very muscular. She's very young. Maybe that'll come around. But yeah, at this point in her career, that is fair to say. But this is a girl with a lot of losses from early on in her run. I think her last loss was in 2017 to Marina Rodriguez, a UFC level fighter who's going to be on UFC 300. So nothing wrong with that. And currently we see that Natalia Silva is riding a 10-fight win streak into this event. She does have 12 wins inside the distance, 5 wins via knockout, as well as 7 wins via submission. And I think that she has a good chance to win this fight, but I think what she needs to do against a very seasoned fighter like this is sprawl, brawl, try and keep it upright and land the bigger shots. Because I think if she does that, she can outlast her opponent. She can have more cardio to push down the stretch. And I think she can get the win here in what should be a very close and competitive fight. But if there's takedowns for Viviane Araujo, it could definitely, change the complexion of the fight, in my view. But I just see her struggling to get those against somebody with the hips and the balance of Natalia Silva. Alrighty, folks. Next up. Or actually, you know what? We should just talk about the trends there out of respect for the ladies. So in terms of Viviane Araujo, she's 3-3 as a UFC underdog for a very respectable 31.8% ROI. But Natalia Silva, on the other hand, is actually 3-0 as a favorite for a 33.7% ROI. So very comparable ROI. And the win rate is a little bit better for Natalia Silva, but both these women, I should say, are both quite competitive and both outperforming their expected odds. So should be a fascinating fight in the women's division, and hope to see these two Brazilian ladies putting on a show. Next up, folks, we've got Aliaskhab Khizriev taking on Makhmud Muradov. And this is a fascinating fight as well because, this does, again, almost fit the system criteria. And that would be Makhmud Muradov is the same age or, just slightly older. You'd prefer if he was younger, but same age also typically works. And so he's the same age. And he is, these are both 33-year-old fighters. So I don't see a massive edge on paper, except that Khizriev is very small. He does not seem big for this division, 5'9". He seemed visibly undersized in his last fight against Tululian. And he's another guy who's been dealing with these bouts of inactivity. We haven't seen constant, performances from Khizriev. Let's go back and look at the record. As a matter of fact, he has more canceled bouts in the UFC than actual bouts. He withdrew from a scheduled bout with Jacob Malkoun in September. He had Abus Magomedov withdrew from a scheduled bout in March of 2022. And he withdrew from a fight with Alessio Di Chirico. He was really sick if he pulled out of that fight. I'm kidding. Kyle Dawkins, that event was canceled due to the coronavirus. And Turman withdrew from a scheduled bout with him. So he's been the king of bad luck. Can't get in the cage. But he's 1-0 in the UFC. He is 9-0 to the ITD prop. 5 wins by knockout, 4 wins by submission. And he's taking on a Makhmud Muradov who really looked to be fraudulent to me at times in his UFC run, including as recently as the Brian Barberena fight. I tweeted after that fight that he kind of just gave me some fraudulent vibes, Was it impressive that he went out there and stuck it out in a hard fight? Yeah, he got the win there. but his cardio still didn't look great. It looked like his wrestling is still something like a work in progress. It didn't seem like it was up to snuff. But he is a big, physical, awkward guy, and we have seen guys that are talented like Caio Araujo struggle at times to control him easily, to put him in uncomfortable grappling situations for extended periods of time comfortably, and to finish the fight. So I think his submission defense has been up to snuff in his recent matchups. But obviously, the Gerald Meerschaert fight, it shows on paper as a submission loss. I think really the problem there was that he didn't have the pace to keep up with Gerald, and he was slowing down. Shout out to Moise. He says Muradov season in the chat. Shout out to Aw Jays, says new to the channel. Appreciate you, brother. Welcome aboard. I hope that you enjoy the show. So when I'm looking at the fight on paper, I say to myself, man, Makhmud Muradov, I'll just give you guys a little inside baseball here. I put together a social media A-side report every week as one of the many things that I do to try and give myself a competitive advantage, give other people that, care about my work a competitive advantage. And when I looked into this card, one thing that stands out on paper, Makhmud Muradov has the biggest social media account on this card, and it's not particularly close. Okay. So when you look at that, that does say to me, man, do I want to, get involved in chalk odds, fading, one of the biggest stars on the card? That's not something I love to do. It's not to say it's not profitable at times. You could definitely find examples and advantages fading the market and things like that. But I look at this fight and I say to myself, man, Makhmud Muradov, he's had a lot of fights. He's been working on his game. He's been trying to improve. 17-1 career to the knockout. That's a lot of knockouts to have on your record, and very few in his recent run. But he has shown flashes of power, knocked out Trevor Smith in the UFC, knocked out Andrew Sanchez in the UFC. And, I thought that Brian Barberena was going to get submitted in that fight, but he's tough as an old leather boot. He found a way to keep winning. You look at what Bailey has to say in the chat. All of his losses are solid. Caio Araujo, Gerald Meerschaert, David Ramirez back in the day, Maciej Rozanowski. So, yeah, he hasn't lost very much since 2016. So I think that's fair to say. I do think Khizriev is also very good at what he does. I think Khizriev, like I said, a little bit undersized, but 14-0 is hard to argue with, right? He's doing everything right, and he's going out there and getting wins like he's asked of. Dennis Tululian, not a very good fighter, didn't have much to offer him, and got absolutely, served on the ground there. But he had been doing a great job prior to that as well. He had been putting together a pretty solid resume, and looking like he's a guy who's willing to go out there, grind to get the win. But a lot of these wins are coming via early submission. And you do have to question, based on that Tululian fight, if this guy has the cardio to keep pushing for 15 minutes, because we saw Muradov was not taken out of the fight by Caio Araujo. And Caio is not the best finisher, but he can make you pay if he gets to those dominant positions. And Caio was more worried about controlling the positions there. And if Khizriev's doing that here too, that could be a little bit of danger for him. I do think that Muradov could storm back on him in rounds 2 and 3 here, which is not something I'd normally say. But I also do worry, though, that Muradov could just completely gas out in this fight from getting out-wrestled himself, and it could turn into a gross slop fest and go to decision, and Khizriev gets the win, via out-wrestling him for 2 rounds. So, yeah, for me, it's just a weird fight on paper. As well, I got to do a little bit more research on this one, but let's go through and see if the trends can be illuminating for us on this fight. Obviously, the size, like I mentioned, anthropomorphic advantage is going to go towards the Makhmud Muradov side here, the side of the underdog. He is going to have more professional experience. He's going to be just 6 months older here, both men 33 years of age at the time of the fight. And you look, he's going to have a 1.5-inch reach advantage and a 3-inch height advantage even more significant, a 5-inch height advantage as well on paper. So Makhmud Muradov, the much bigger fighter, but unfortunately, when you are that much bigger, it is going to present your hips to your opponent. So Khizriev should have some easier opportunities to set up his takedowns in the first round. But now let's talk about the betting trends. Makhmud Muradov, guys, has been favored in all but one UFC fight. When he was an underdog, he did go on to lose a unanimous decision to Caio Araujo, but his only other loss in the UFC came as a minus 588 favorite against Gerald GM3 Meerschaert. So if you've bet on Muradov as a favorite, he's turned you a 16.2% profit. But because of that loss as an underdog, and because he hasn't been a crazy ROI favorite, he has produced a negative overall return for his backers in the UFC. So if you've been betting money on this guy, you have not been winning. As for his opponent here, Khizriev was a massive, massive favorite in his fight against Denis Tiulian, so much so that he had a 11% ROI on the money line there at a minus 900 favorite. So nothing really to be had there, nothing really to be said there. I have to study Khizriev a little bit more to know if he's worth the chalk. But for me, that's a fight on paper where, the early indicators would say it seems like a dogger pass situation. But he's an undefeated fighter for a reason. So don't want to not give him any short shrift. But Khizriev didn't look like a world beater to me against Tiulian. So I hope to see a better product from him here. All right, guys. Next up, we will round out this main card with Gilbert Urbina taking on Charles Chuck Buffalo Radke. I remember thinking Charles looked extremely sloppy in that win over Blood Diamond Mike Mathetha. When I'm looking at it, I say to myself, man, this guy is a decent finisher from the regional scene, but I don't know that his skills are going to translate at the highest level. It did seem like his cardio was falling off a cliff in that fight. It did seem like he was cheating a lot, if my memory serves, and the referee kept getting involved. So when I look at that, I say to myself, man, Radke definitely a work in progress and looks kind of like a regional fighter. But when you look at the Gilbert Urbina side, he's minus 200 as a favorite, which is a little bit surprising as well. Fighting out of the BMF ranch, he's going to have a 3-inch reach advantage here, as well as a significant height advantage, according to Tapology. He's a much younger fighter as well, 27 compared to 33 years of age for Chuck Buffalo here. And people are expecting Urbina to get it done via these Tapology votes. But for me, Urbina is kind of a hit and miss guy, and he's definitely a guy that can be rocked with punches on the feet. So, laying a big chalk price with a guy like Urbina, this does feel like a card where not many of the favorites are very trustworthy, at least as I'm seeing it. And a couple of the sharp people I've talked to have kind of felt the same way. But it's a lower level Apex card, and you're getting minus 150, minus 170 on some of these fighters that just have clear deficiencies or clear problems. So that's always tough for me. For Gilbert Urbina, wins over Orion Kosi and Angelo Trevino don't really tell me that you're ready for prime time. But the fact that he went to decision with Sean Brady does tell me he's a tough guy. He can go out there and compete. As for Chuck Buffalo, the wins over Raheem Forrest might even be more impressive than the win over Mike Mathetha. I think that's probably the case. But Chuck Buffalo is just a guy that, really didn't impress me in that fight. So I don't feel compelled to bet on this fight. But again, the pricing does feel weird and kind of like dogger pass situation. Let me go look at my Urbina bets. I took Brian Battle against Gilbert Urbina back in the day. And I had the under in that Chuck Buffalo and Mike Mathetha fight. Maybe that's why I hated that fight so much, because he did not fight like he was a man looking for the under there. Let's see if we've got any trends here. Chuck Buffalo has been an underdog 3 times, and they were all pre-UFC. It looks like. So CFFC, he was running up that paper as an underdog. Can he keep it going in the UFC? Who knows? As for Gilbert Urbina, he was a pick'em price with Orion Kosi, but he has been an underdog in every other fight. So now you're paying that chalk odds for him. Fair play. Not for me, I'll tell you that. But I'll do a little more digging, a little more research, a little more due diligence, and let you guys know what I have to offer when I do the tape study there, but not much to dig into from a trend perspective. So let's dig into these prelims instead, where we've got a rematch of Molly Meatball McCann taking on Diana Belbita. And you may have a case of 2 women moving in opposite directions here. You've got, on the one hand, Molly McCann 2 straight losses in the UFC. She got beat by Erin Blanchfield via Kimura. She got submitted via armbar against Julija Stoliarenko. So she's looking to bounce back here. She was on a 3-fight winning streak prior to that in the company, and now she's really fallen off in terms of her momentum. So they're trying to get her a win by putting her back in there with a girl she's already beat. But Diana Belbita is going to be 27 years of age compared to 33 years of age for Molly McCann. She's a much younger fighter as well in this spot. She's going to be the bigger fighter. The anthropomorphic advantages are there. She's going to be taller by 3 inches. She's going to have a 6-inch reach advantage. So I think that when you're looking at a plus 240 underdog in a women's fight where the momentum and the youth and everything else is on the Belbita side, I mean, it's an obvious dog or pass situation for me, money line. I think that McCann could go out there with the intent that, hey, I'm going to go make a statement on this girl. I'm going to take her down. I'm going to beat her up. Hey, maybe she can go out there and do that. But Molly McCann flying all the way to Vegas, no Patty the Batty, just Molly being Molly and kind of being half in, half out, it seems like her last couple fights. This doesn't feel like it's right for me. And, she goes out there and gets a win over somebody on the regional scene. That shows up on Tapology, right? You go look, win via armbar. Nice. She's getting back out there. She's on the grappling circuit. You go click on that girl's Tapology that she submitted. Every Tapology entry is just that girl getting submitted via different methods. So, I think that Diana Belbita is not a very good fighter, but at plus 240 or whatever, it's like, how wrong could you be? So I won't overthink this one too much, but let's talk about the betting trends at least, because that is important. I do think that she's been crapping the bet as a dog, Molly McCann. So last time out, she was a minus 200 favorite. Crapped the bed, got submitted in the first round, but she was plus 350 against Erin Blanchfield. Everybody knew what time it was that night. She was minus 400 against Goldie, got the win via KO1, minus 141 against Luana Carolina, who we will discuss. And also won as an underdog, plus 105 against Jeong Kim. So as a favorite, Molly McCann has been underwater, guys, not producing 5-4 as a favorite for a minus 22.7% ROI. So not great. And as for the Diana Belbita side, she has not been very productive in the UFC either. You look, she has been a negative proposition any way you wanted to bet her, as a favorite, as a dog, overall, not making you money. But she has come through before as a plus 105 underdog against Hannah Goldie. So, hey, it's like the New York lottery. You never know, right? But I look at this and I say it is a little bit like playing lotto, but I do think it's got to be a clear dog or pass situation. I can't justify Molly McCann at 70+%. All righty, folks. Next up, we got Charles Johnson Energy taking on Azat Maksum. Frankly, I don't remember Azat Maksum's game too well, but I have a strong feeling he's going to win this fight. He went out there, he beat Tyson Nam in his UFC debut, and he did it by split decision. He has a bunch of wins via choke on his record. I like to see that. Seems like he fought a pretty tough regional scene in Kazakhstan, mostly guys that had winning records, especially of late, more recently. As for Charles Johnson, though, he's definitely fought the better level of competition overall. Fought Rafael Estevam, Cody Durden, Ode Osborne, Jimmy Flick, Zalga Zumagulov, Muhammad Mukayev, Carlos Mota. Those are all UFC level fighters right there. So he's definitely going out there and putting it all on the line. But if you have to criticize Charles Johnson, it's just not enough initiative in his fights. He's a little bit too accepting of what his opponents want to do. He's a little bit too reactive at times. He says he's going to change all that. He says he's going to do it different. But it's almost a believe it when you see it with Charles Johnson. And what surprises me here is the line. I expected this to be minus 2XX, something like that. But I think people maybe are thinking, hey, this guy's got the UFC level experience. Maybe they're betting on Charles Johnson for that reason. But I do think an undefeated guy in Azat Maksum, 17-0, great record on paper, probably going to attract a lot of betting attention. And he's not like Shavkat going out there and finishing everybody. But he is going out there and finishing most of his opponents, and also going out there and getting all the wins so far. So I like what I've seen from Azat Maksum that I can remember. But frankly, guys, there's just too many fights, too many fighters. I got to go back and watch a little bit more tape to give you guys a full-fledged opinion on that one. But for me, the undefeated Kazakh, 17-0, that's really hard for me to fade, especially with a guy like Charles Johnson, who could be cut with a loss in this fight. Next up, guys, let's move to Themba Gorimbo taking on Pete Rodriguez. And this is a fight where I'm a Themba Gorimbo mark. All right. I've always loved Themba. I liked him when he came to the UFC. I've always wanted him to win. I always root for him. When he loses, I'm disappointed. But he's been doing a lot better in his recent fights. He's been getting better. And I've communicated with Themba. I've spoken to him in the DMs. He's a real sweetheart of a guy. And I think that he's a serious fighter, man. I think he's all in. I think he really wants to be here. I think he really works hard. And I think he tries to surround himself with people. I think he's coachable. I think he wants to learn. I think he wants to get better. Is he the best fighter I've ever seen? Oh, God, no, he's not. But what is he? He's a hard worker. He means well. He's going to get in there and keep trying and keep getting better. And I just think he's going to go out there and fight for your money. So when I look at a guy like Themba, I say, man, he's got some, ability. He's got heart. And I think he's got some charisma as well. I think people are interested in his story. I think people like, what Themba brings to the table. And, last time out, I had Themba Gorimbo against Sato, and I had Themba Gorimbo inside the distance. And, I don't think that this is like a easy click at like a minus 225 or something like that, but I'll wait and I'll see if more money comes in on the Pete Rodriguez side. I really hope so. And, I like them, but just overall, I think that he's getting better with the grappling. I think he's got a great frame. And I think that he was too anxious when he first came to the UFC. Frankly, I think he should have submitted AJ Fletcher. I think he was a better fighter than AJ. But I think he made a couple critical mistakes. I think he was jittery. I think he was panicky. I think he couldn't believe he made it to the UFC. I think now that he has a lot of his financial security and things like that, I think there's just a lot more, focus from Themba Gorimbo. So I like Themba to get the win here, and I think he's going to do it inside the distance, actually. I think Pete Rodriguez slows down. I think he's very hittable. I don't like what I've seen from Pete Rodriguez, and beating Mike Jackson tells me almost nothing. Yeah, that's how I feel about it, guys. I think Themba's going to get the job done here, but don't love the price. Next up, guys, we've got Blake Bilder taking on Yeong Lee. And this is a fascinating one as well because we've got a Road to UFC winner. We've got Road to UFC going on the same night, I believe. So a little bit of product placement there. But we've got the 33-year-old Blake Bilder here. And, for me, Blake has just never really done it. That loss to Kyle Nelson, I kind of saw coming a little bit. I saw that as a very live possibility. I think I picked that in my Roto Grinders article. As a matter of fact, Kyle Nelson by decision. And reason being, you look at Blake Bilder, he's got a game that is kind of designed to like meme out wins or lose. If you look, he's been a lot more flashy and gimmicky in his wins. 4 wins via submission, 1 win via knockout, 3 via decision. But if you look at those decision wins over 0-1, Julian Baez, split draw against 3-3, Dennis Linton, win over 5-8-1, Darion Chapman via unanimous decision, and a win over Shane Yeong. And guys, Shane Yeong, I believe, has been cut from the organization. I do think he's one of the worst, featherweights on the roster. Like if you were trying to match up somebody to get a win, you would pick Shane Yeong. Then you look at the Kyle Nelson fight. And, that was in Canada, I believe. They sent him out there to get beat by the Canadian in Canada. Tough sledding. Now he's got the Road to UFC guy on the night of Road to UFC. That seems like a tough, mission as well. And, talking about anthropomorphic advantages, we've got a much younger fighter, 28 versus 33. We've got 2 inches of height, 5'10 versus 5'8. And we've got a significant reach advantage, 73 inches against 68.5, according to Tapology. So I think that Yeong Lee is an interesting spot this weekend. But I will just say that, big social media underdog is Blake Bilder, right? 200,000 Instagram followers, nothing to sneeze at there. He's a guy that seems pretty popular, especially among these preliminary fighters. And Yeong Lee is the opposite, right? 11,000. People don't really know who he is. So maybe they're trying to build him with a win over Blake Bilder. I think that's a very live possibility because Blake's also a little bit of an older guy for this division. I don't think he's necessarily that same tier of prospect, but I have to watch more tape on the Yeong Lee side. What I do remember about Blake Bilder is he likes to throw some combinations with the hands. He does have a pretty slick back take series. He can go out there and get some wins. But a lot of the time, guys, I felt like he was losing fights and finding ways to win. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I don't know that it's sustainable. And so for me, I don't like the Blake Bilder side. I think that Yeong Lee is going to get it done here, but I don't like laying chalk on, debutante type fighters, minus 150 range, 60%. I can't really say I'm more confident than that to say I'm getting value on the line. So no need to bet here, but I'm taking Yeong Lee for my initial pick on this fight. And there's no real statistical significance, to speak about on that fight from a analytics standpoint or trends. Next up, we've got some analytics and trends to talk about with Julija Stoliarenko and Luana Carolina with this next women's fight. And Luana Carolina is coming into this fight as the underdog, plus 115. And Luana Carolina is also, the Brazilian, right? She's slightly younger here, just 2 months. So a lot of parity in this matchup. But, one of the things that's interesting here is that Luana Carolina, if you look at her betting results, as an underdog, she's 3-3 in the UFC for a 48% ROI. Overall, 49.8% ROI in the company. Pretty good stuff. As for Julija Stoliarenko, she's 0-1 as a UFC favorite, and she's not been profitable. If you backed her in the UFC, 2-5 overall for a minus 25.3% ROI. Now, in my case, guys, I will say I bet Julija Stoliarenko on the money line against Julia Avila for a quarter unit. That was stupid, and I lost money. I bet Julija Stoliarenko bigly at plus 155 against Jessica Rose Clark, and I felt good about that. And then I bet her as a favorite against Chelsea Chandler, and I felt like an idiot. So I've made money betting on her. I made money betting on Alexis Davis via decision. I made money betting on Stoliarenko sub 1 and sub against Jessica Rose Clark. So I've done very well betting on Stoliarenko. But I think that Stoliarenko is a little bit fraudulent. She's got good grappling, but it's a little one note. She likes that armbar. She doesn't do much of anything else. She's got some power on the feet, but she's really hittable as well. She doesn't have very good defense or anything much to speak of in that department. So the Ivana Petrovic fight is literally a fight so bad I don't remember it. I literally don't remember that fight happening. I don't know who Ivana Petrovic is, so I'll have to go back and rewatch that. I watch every fight, and I don't remember it, so that's ironic. But in any case, Joanne Wood losing that fight via split decision, I thought that probably should have went Luana's way. Very controversial fight, close fight, and could have went either way, certainly. The spinning back elbow loss to Molly McCann, close fight, but Molly McCann, on the night was not going to be denied. So I think that, certainly some positive notes from Luana Carolina include the Lupita Godinez unanimous decision, stuffed the takedowns in rounds 2 and 3. That was a good look. Paulina Botelho, a bigger girl, stronger, was able to get the win there as well. Ariane Lipski, that's a tough one, but Ariane Lipski is obviously very violent, the queen of violence. So she was able to get that knee bar, but a little bit of a strange position, a little bit uncharacteristic of her offensive attack as well. Beat Priscilla Cachoeira, who's one of the worst fighters in the UFC's history. So good on you. But Luana's basically just got a big, awkward body. It's not easy to take down. And I think that Stoliarenko could easily submit her in the first round. But if that doesn't happen, I think that Luana Carolina is going to turn into the in-fight live betting favorite after round 1. So for me, feels like a dog or pass situation. And maybe you look for the props on the Stoliarenko side. But I also don't want to oversimplify this fight. So I will tape it and come up with a little bit more of a granular opinion. But for me, I just know that Stoliarenko is kind of a one-track fighter. Goes out there looking for the armbar, does gas out with some regularity, has had weight issues throughout her career, has a ton of red flags. So at chalk, don't feel great about it. But she is coming off the biggest marketing push of her career. She did get that win over Molly McCann. You beat somebody big, you take their hype. So something to keep in mind. But both of them on the same card again, and I think both of them could lose here. So whatever, we'll have to wait and see. Next up, guys, we got Marquel Mederos taking on Landon Quinones. This is a fight I do not have much to say, frankly, because both these guys are guys that I need to familiarize myself with more. Marquel Mederos, I got his fight wrong, I believe, on the Contender Series. Isakov looked like a marketable guy, handsome enough, big muscle guy. But overall, Mederos was just moving faster. He was slicker, and he got the win there. So hats off to him. I was just dead wrong about that fight. But when you look at Landon Quinones, he stepped up on short notice and did very well against Nasrat Haqparast. He gave him an honest fight. And Nasrat's been looking better in his recent performances. The loss to Jason Knight looked terrible. The way that he went down in that fight, I did not like to see. So I do think Mederos, coming out of Factory X, does not have any submission wins on his record. But if he's ever to break out a submission game, now might be the time to do it, right? Because Landon Quinones did look like a fish out of water against Jason Knight, who is admittedly a black belt. But Muhammad Naimov was another guy who people did not rate, who people thought was a bum, who people thought they stunk. And he's been going out there getting results in the UFC because of his physicality and his willingness to do whatever it takes to win, right? Cheat, lie, steal, whatever it takes. But you look, those are the losses. So none of them are really egregious, right? He hasn't lost anybody where you're like, man, this guy really stinks. But he's also just never really done anything where you're like, man, this guy's somebody to pay attention to. No wins that I'm like, man, this one's blowing my hair back. So I think Landon Quinones is kind of just a all-arounder, 28 years of age, lone wolf, interesting nickname there. I think there's a couple lone wolves on this card. And Marquel Mederos on the other side is coming off that Contender Series rub, is coming off that big win. So maybe people are going to be a little too hyped on that side. But I just don't really have a great read on this fight until I dig in more. So I will come back to you guys with more information later in the week. But we don't really have a statistically significant sample for those guys either to talk about betting trends. Last but not least, guys, we got Thomas Peterson. I called this man's first ever career win by submission in his last fight on the Contender Series. I was very proud of that fact. Patrons got that one as well. I think it was like plus 1,100, plus 1,200, whatever it was at the time. Very good stuff. However, Chandler Cole was a much different ballgame, in my humble opinion, to Jamal Pogues. Chandler Cole was a guy that had a wrestling background, this and that, but frankly, he did not have the body, the physicality, the preparedness, I did not think, for the fight. He looked to be a little bit out of shape overall. I did not think he carried his weight well enough as a professional athlete, with no disrespect intended. So I think that when you looked at that, that was a very winnable fight for Peterson. And I just felt like he was willing and able to attack those short arm lock series. So I called it, almost to a T there. However, Jamal Pogues is not an easy mark like that. He's been submitted before, but he's been submitted by good guys. He's been submitted earlier in his career, and it was at the middleweight division. In this division, I think of Jamal Pogues as a guy who's probably an underrated grappler, frankly. Got multiple takedowns against Josh Parisian. And I think that when you look, interesting. Dixon says, Liam, Rich, JWB is all over Pogues here. I don't like Pogues at all. Listen, I think that Pogues is not a great fighter, but what I'll tell you is I think people might underrate Pogues here now. And the reason being is Mick Parkin was set up for success, which I said at the time. I didn't know who was going to win the fight, but I just felt like it was set up for success. And Mick Parkin was training with Tom. He's training in London. Crowd's going to go wild for him. And Pogues has flown over there, looked fat, looked unprepared. I feel like, Pogues has a statement to make here. I feel like Pogues feels disrespected. I feel like he's embarrassed. And I think he's going to show up in a lot better shape this time. So the problem I have with Peterson, you look at that Waldo Acosta Cortez fight. Waldo looked like he had him out of sorts in round 3. He looked like he was very tired. He looked like he was becoming extremely hittable and predictable with his shots. And Waldo did not look great in his last fight. Jamal Pogues, on the other hand, he actually had submission wins on his amateur run. I think he started his career professionally with a submission win, and he hasn't turned to that in a long time. But I don't think that Peterson has this massive grappling edge here. Like, I think he could probably get takedowns in round 1, but I don't know that he could do that. And I think that if Pogues is on top, Pogues might be a more savvy operator with more experience in those phases of the fight. So for me, dogger pass situation, greasy heavyweight type of fight. And yeah, I could get creative with the props there when they open up. I'll let you guys know. But yeah, I just think it's a fascinating fight, and I just don't think it's an easy run over matchup. I could see Pokes just sticking him with a jab from the outside, defending the takedowns and winning the fight. So there you have it, guys. 90 minutes, 13 fights. I had an absolute blast. We're here in the morning trying something a little bit different. I hope that you guys have enjoyed it. And I want to just leave you guys with a couple quick housekeeping notes and news items for the show, let's say. So number one, I'm expecting to announce a sponsor later in the week on Bets and Banter. Really excited about it. Great person in the community that I'm working with. And I'm just excited about the partnership. I'm excited about the product. And I'm excited to share it with you guys. So that's something that I want you guys to be excited for. Want to put it on your radar now. So you guys expect that. And there'll be more information to come, obviously, very shortly. As for what to expect the rest of this week, I got more content coming always on Twitter. So if you guys are interested in getting more fight tape, some breakdowns, some free games, some free information, I'm always going to drop that on Twitter as well. So follow me there. Follow me right here. Get subscribed. Make sure you drop a like on the video. Really helps to grow the channel, helps other people find the videos, which I really appreciate. I put a lot of time, effort, and energy into these things. From the trends and data, which I, ascertain myself, to some of the things that I figure out from the social media end of things. Again, that's all proprietary information. I figured that out myself, trying to just put you guys in a position to succeed. And so I've had a blast doing it. And I'll tell you guys this, we have a show up already on podcast, which is the main event breakdown. So if you guys just want to hear that, that's already available on podcast platforms. My goal is to get this time stamped and on podcast today by the end of the day. So I'm trying to get more diligent about putting that up right away. But you guys can always know my shows are going to come out first here on YouTube, but I try and get that ad-free version as quickly as possible available for the audio only homies. So appreciate you guys for that. It is not bet openly, Dixon, but I appreciate you asking, my brother. And what I will say is, if it wasn't valuable to me, I would never share it with you guys, but I think that the person behind it, great person. And I think that the product is a great product. So extremely excited to share more information. I'll leave it there. But the last thing I'll say, guys, is if you're looking for more information from me, where I'm getting these trends, data information from, all that is down in the description box below. You can easily find more of my work there. If you're looking for my written content, I write for Action Network. I write for Roto Grinders. I write for scoresandodds.com. So you can find more content from me there as well. All of that is in the description below. If you guys have questions, comments, concerns about this fight card, about cards that are coming up, about content that you want to see, please go ahead and drop that in the comment section down below. Happy to get back to you guys. Happy to answer those questions. Try and be extremely responsive in the comment section as well. So if you guys are respectful with your disagreements, if you're respectful with your questions, I'm always happy to try and get back to you guys with whatever I possibly can to help put you in a position to succeed. And with that being said, God bless you all. Enjoy the fights and come back next time because we're having all the same fun again. Good luck on UFC Vegas 85, everybody. Thank you.